My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
And my name is Pixel Patch. I'm a joyful geek with an expertise in gaming, both tabletop and video.
Our mission is to bring nerd culture to the masses.
And by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, TV, mega comic books, or is that graphic novels, cartoons, groups, that's animation, Disney, Star Wars, Dragon Ball Z, Pokemon, and Digimon, and Mighty Morphin, Power Rangers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Yu-Gi-Oh! And Nintendo, Cinematic Universes, Marvel, DC, Justice League, is Batman, Leagues with Superman, Flash, Wonder Woman, Avengers, Iron Man, Captain Jack, Loki, Spider-Man, and Hulk and Logan, X-Men, Battlers, Alien, Galaxy, Guardians, Star Trek, Prick, Trick, Card, and Janeway, Nerds and Geeks from gather around and join them in the Big Bad Jar, Average Joe and Pixel Patch, they peek under the microscope.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd culture under the microscope.
Gonna cross-examine all that nerd culture.
I think that's something that happens in a courtroom.
Well, we can't do that here?
Well, this is a lab, right?
Fair, but I mean, we're still like examining the subject matter.
You could probably tell by the voice of the person who is not me that Pixel Patch is not with us this week. He is unfortunately coming down with a fever, and
Fever of 103.
Returning to the podcast in Pixel Patch's place this week is an old friend of the show, One Shot.
Hey, everybody.
I feel like we definitely have to change your name now because, you know, you're no longer a one shot. You've had many shots.
Well, many shots doesn't sound good, nor is it anything in particular within nerd culture. I don't want to say it's like 5 shot or like every time I...
Six
every
shot?
Time I come,
6 shot? Isn't that like a type of gun?
That is a 6 shooter. Yeah.
6 shooter?
Yeah. But then I'd need to change it like each time I came back, and then it would be...
Well,
like,
you know, if you really want to be a true one shot, you just have to completely change your personality every time you come on, so it definitely feels like you're a different
that is true.
character every time.
Well, I bring something a little new every time I come back, you know?
Fair enough. And speaking of bringing new things to the show, you know, we always ask, what kind of nerdy or geeky things have you been up to since your last year? And I'm going to ask that you try to avoid talking about D&D because I know that's a huge thing for you, and I know you mentioned it in the past. So,
Average Joe, that's unfortunate. That's so nothing new has happened. No, I'm joking. I've been watching a lot of the new Marvel movies that have been coming out. Been enjoying them to some extent.
To some extent, okay.
To some extent. Well, you know, you take your good and your bad. Also been, I'm a big fan of, light novels. That's the origins of most manga and anime. That's kind of like Japanese, Korean, and Chinese written novels.
All right, give us an example of one you're reading right now.
Oh my goodness. You wouldn't, like, none of the things are mainstream. I could not pick one out.
Just give us a title.
Solo Leveling Warrior. It's about a guy who it's not so much about video games actually, which you might think, but basically these things called dungeons open up. They're like portals to other dimensions, and so people within the world need to go into them, and they need to fight the creatures, or else they'll start invading into the world. So it's very interesting kind of subject matter. I've enjoyed it, but it's done now. It's completed.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. So, what was that called? Free Level Warrior?
Solo Leveling Warrior.
So, if that sounds interesting to you, go read Solo Leveling Warrior. We're here to talk about the latest film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah, that's Captain Marvel.
Captain Marvel, indeed. And as is tradition on this show, every time we talk about a comic book character for the first time, we ask ourselves some questions about where the character came from and how we first encountered said character, because maybe it wasn't this movie. I don't know. So we'll start with you, One Shot. Do you remember where you first encountered Captain Marvel?
So my earlier memories of Captain Marvel involve like a team of people called the Marvels, and it was like led by this guy who was a guy named Captain Marvel, and he was kind of the leader of this squad of Marvels. And like there was different characters in that like were Marvels. I don't really understand how that worked. And then when I heard the new Captain Marvel was coming out, I'm like, oh, it's a woman. Okay, cool. And then it was like, no, that's. And then I heard it was like, no, that's the actual Captain Marvel in the comics. And it was like, oh, what did I read?
Are you thinking of the DC Comics Captain Marvel?
Maybe was that the one where there's like a bunch of squad of Marvels? Like I don't.
It's okay. So this is gonna get confusing, but this movie we're talking about is called Captain Marvel. The first character in comic books to be called Captain Marvel was published by a company in the 40s called Fawcett Comics. So it was neither Marvel or DC. It was actually a third company.
Ooh.
And the Captain Marvel in those stories was a little boy who would say the magic word Shazam and turn into an adult with superpowers.
So Shazam is actually Captain Marvel?
Yes, so the character that is getting a movie next month, the movie's called Shazam, was the first character in the comics to be called Captain Marvel.
And is Shazam is part of one of these two universes now, right?
Yes, so in the 50s, basically Fawcett Comics kind of stopped publishing, and DC Comics bought the rights to Captain Marvel. And by the time they decided to introduce Captain Marvel comics again, Marvel Comics had created a character called Captain Marvel, and they essentially had the copyright on Captain Marvel.
Okay.
So when DC Comics tried to publish comics about Captain Marvel, they couldn't call them Captain Marvel. They had to call the comics Shazam. So in the stories, the characters could call him Captain Marvel, but they couldn't have any merchandise or actually have the books called Captain Marvel, because Marvel Comics had introduced a comic called Captain Marvel.
Okay.
How many times can you say Captain Marvel?
Yeah.
So the DC Captain Marvel family, there's Mary Marvel and like an older guy who they all have like white capes and lightning bolts in their chests. Does that sound familiar to you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
that sounds exactly like it.
Okay, so yeah, you're thinking more so of the DC Captain Marvel.
Okay, then this would be my first foyer into the Captain Marvel of Marvel.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, so this movie, just so I'm clear, this movie, Marvel Studios Captain Marvel, was your first exposure to the Marvel Comics version of Captain Marvel.
That'd be correct.
Okay. Well, I have had some experience with this character before. I've never been a huge fan. I've never read any of her comics. But I did grow up watching the 90s X-Men series.
Okay, yeah.
And believe it or not, Carol Danvers, the character who is Captain Marvel in the movie and in the comics right now, appears in one episode.
Yeah. I remember, and I guess this is the other part of what I guess I do know, is that Rogue actually gains powers from her. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. So
initiating takeoff procedure. Now.
It's Miss Marvel!
That's Ms. Marvel to you, Roundhead.
for those of you who aren't familiar with the X-Men, one of them is named Rogue, and her mutant power is that she absorbs the life force out of people she touches. So what that means is for humans, she basically makes them faint and sometimes die. For other mutants, she temporarily gains access to their powers, and then they go away.
And sometimes they lose theirs.
And there's an instance in the comics where she made contact with Carol Danvers, who, this is kind of getting into her comic book history, wasn't Captain Marvel at the time, but she had superpowers anyway, and then when Rogue touched her, Captain Marvel, or Carol Danvers, lost her powers, and Rogue gained the ability to fly and have super strength.
And did she also gain all the plasma blasts?
No.
Is that just from this movie?
No, that's from the comics too, but at that point, Carol didn't have those powers.
Okay.
I know
so Rogue became a flying, super strong woman.
Yeah. Yeah, so the version of Rogue
and she kept them.
Yes, because of the unique physiology of Carol, it basically affected the way that Rogue's body reacted.
Because she wasn't a mutant, rather just a human with powers.
Yes.
Okay.
And because she was part alien, that also affected the...
Ah, yes.
So anyway, all I have to say, my first exposure to Carol Danvers, the main character of the movie we're talking about today, was in an episode of X-Men. And it was a one-off appearance, and all it does is really explain why Rogue can fly and has super strength. And again, at that point in Marvel Comics, Carol wasn't going by the moniker of Captain Marvel, so in that episode of X-Men, she goes by Ms. Marvel.
Okay.
And so I didn't really think much of it. It's like, oh, it's a one-off appearance.
Again, just a one-bit character who gives her powers.
It's great. Now I know why Rogue can fly and has super strength. That's cool. So there you go. So neither of us have a whole lot of experience with the character, which gets us into her history. So she is indeed a character from the comic books. She's had quite the complicated history. So I've already gone to the trouble of explaining all the Captain Marvel shenanigans.
And she had a number of reboots or something?
Well, okay, so when Carol Danvers, the character who is the main character of the movie that we're talking about today, first appeared in the comics, she was a side character. She was an associate of the first Captain Marvel in Marvel Comics.
Okay, so she wasn't even the first Captain Marvel.
No, she is, in fact, I think the 6th or 7th
What?
Captain Marvel in Marvel Comics
That seems crazy to me.
that they've had.
But
Well,
is she the most liked? Like, why is it the 6th? Why are we...
well, basically, like this is the Marvel brand of Captain Marvel has never been super strong. Like most of the other people who've taken over the mantle never stayed in the role very long, and I don't know if it's because they weren't popular or because their series didn't go anywhere. Who knows? But anyway, Carol was first introduced in Marvel Superheroes number 13 in March 1968. So among the characters who have gotten MCU movies, she's one of the newer characters.
more recent character.
I think the only character who's starred in an MCU movie who is a newer character would be the Scott Lang version of Ant-Man, because he didn't come out in the comics till like the late 70s.
Okay.
But as I said, when Carol was first introduced, she was kind of a side character, an associate of the first Captain Marvel. The first Captain Marvel was indeed an alien who basically posed as a human being.
Okay.
And the idea...
Kind of like a Superman vibe.
More like a Martian Manhunter,
Okay.
because it's not like Superman ever hit about the fact that he was an alien. I guess as Clark Kent he does. So yeah, that's fair. But all I have to say, so when Carol first showed up, she had no powers. She was an ordinary human being who was basically a really smart person because she was working, I think, at like NASA or something like that.
Mhm.
And she was popular enough in that series with the other Captain Marvel that they decided to turn her into a superhero. So almost a decade later, in January 1977,
Okay.
she was transformed into a superhero of her own called Ms. Marvel. And so she got her own series, Ms. Marvel #1, and in the story they explain her comic book origin of how she got superpowers, which, as we talk about the movie, it plays out pretty much the same way.
In an accident of alien origin.
Yeah, that's a good way of broadly speaking about it. So from 1977 on, she has essentially been a superhero in Marvel Comics. And not long after her introduction, she joined the Avengers. So there is precedent in the comic books for...
She's been around before.
Yeah, she's essentially been an active superhero since 1977. But for whatever reason, throughout her entire history, she never found like a core audience of fans or
never quite jived.
Because basically what
the
ends
audience.
up happening is that she's gone through a lot of different changes. Like she's an example of one of those comic book characters who never really got settled, I guess you could say, into one persona or one identity or one story iteration. Because she was Ms. Marvel, and then later on she got roped up in the X-Men comics and became a character called Binary. And that was in 1982, so it's really only...
Was she still Danvers at that point?
Yeah, this is Carol Danvers still. But basically it only took her, 5 years in the real world to go from being Ms. Marvel to now she's Binary. So she's a different character with a different set of powers. And then it's in 1998, so again, that's a good many years later.
Another 6 years or something?
No, 82 to 98, so that's
wow, okay.
it's like
So
16
18
years. So she was Binary for a while, and then she rebranded herself as Warbird.
Okay.
So she more or less had the same... She had two different costumes as Ms. Marvel, and so she more or less kept the second costume, but then changed the name, because I guess she didn't want to be just known as the spin-off of Captain Marvel anymore.
She changed her name, or the Marvel changed her name?
I don't remember, because I don't know the story. I'm going to guess it's more so probably the Marvel Comics trying to change the name, trying to mix it up. Because originally, basically, Carol is essentially a female version of the Captain Marvel character. In the same way that Supergirl and Batgirl are meant to be like just female versions of
male
characters. Ms. Marvel was originally meant to be that. She had basically the same powers as Captain Marvel.
So Marvel fully acknowledges that their character Captain Marvel is came from this other property, Captain Marvel.
Yeah.
Shazam.
Well,
Okay.
they don't reference the Shazam Captain Marvel.
Nor does she need Shazam to become powerful.
Correct. Oh boy.
Are you still with us?
Yeah, so at some point in the comics, the Marvel Captain Marvel, who was called Mar-Vell, so that's the idea, is that his name was Mar-Vell.
Okay.
So that's the explanation for why he's called Captain Marvel.
Because it's his name.
Yeah, and it's 2 words. It was decided that after he died, then the next thing they could do to really bring Carol back into the spotlight, if you will, is to make her the new Captain Marvel. So as I mentioned, throughout the Marvel Comics publishing, there were many different Captain Marvels, and then finally in 2012 they decided, let's make Carol Captain Marvel. She's been around long enough. She's been
Upgrade her from B-list to A-list.
Yeah, and so ironically her first appearance as Captain Marvel was in an issue of Avenging Spider-Man.
Okay.
Now, Avenging Spider-Man was a short-lived series wherein Spider-Man basically teamed up with different Avengers.
Okay.
So I think it's interesting that
When did that come out?
2012.
Okay, so like 5 or 6, 7 years ago.
7 years ago, yeah. So Carol has been the only Captain Marvel in Marvel Comics for the past 7 years. Because 1 month after her appearance in Avenging Spider-Man #9, the new Captain Marvel series with her as the main character was released, and in Marvel Comics continuity, if you will, she's been the one and only Captain Marvel since then.
Okay. But did the series at that point say that she was just the Captain Marvel, or did she like inherit and become Captain Marvel in universe?
And she was essentially the latest character to take on the moniker, so she's fully aware of the fact that like everyone.
There were others.
Yeah.
She's the most recent.
It's not like they retconned
Gotcha.
the story to make it that she was the only Captain Marvel. But funny enough, so just for anyone who doesn't remember this, a retcon is a short form for the phrase retroactive continuity, and it's used often in literature and film to describe when a writer that comes in wants to tell a new story and connect it to something that's happened in the past. They will retroactively add a story element to something in the past that we, the audience, didn't previously know, and it basically is usually done so that a new writer can alter the history of a character to tell a new story. And in comic books, at least, retcons have a negative connotation because it usually means they're changing something about the character that people loved beforehand. The Carol Danvers who became Captain Marvel in 2012 was the same Carol Danvers who had originally, in 1977, gotten her powers as a result of an accident involving Captain Mar-Vell.
Okay.
But recently in the comics, they've actually retconned her origin to remove Mar-Vell from her origin. So the story kind of plays out the same, except his involvement is no longer there.
So she wasn't working for him. She just had an accident that was along the same as before, but
Yeah.
he was just never there.
So Marvel Comics recently has made efforts to essentially kind of really fully remove her from being the female spin-off of the original Marvel Captain Marvel.
Okay.
And make her the definitive, I suppose, Captain Marvel. And again, I don't read these Marvel comics, but I have noticed that essentially, even in the time that she's been Captain Marvel in comics for, or in the real world for 7 years. And I've noticed that her comics have restarted at least 3 times during that. So I don't know.
So in the past 7 years, it's restarted 3 times?
Yeah, and I don't know if that's just Marvel trying to essentially...
Like, they're not hitting their mark, clearly.
Well, what I'm not sure of is if it's a matter of the different series they're launching with her aren't selling well, or if it's Marvel just trying to really capitalize on the appeal of like issue number 1, because frankly, one of the things that excites breeders to come back is reading issue number 1. If you're reading like
starting from the beginning,
yeah, and if you're like even if it's a new artist, a new writer, starting with like issue 35 isn't nearly as exciting as issue 1.
Okay.
So I don't know if because her comic as Captain Marvel has been restarted 3 times. I'm not sure if that is a result of just the comics not selling well and not finding an audience.
Or they're just wanting to hype up sales.
Yeah. But I guess you would argue that if the sales were going well, maybe they wouldn't try to restart it.
Compared to other franchises within Marvel, How often do they restart? Like, I know you have like the heavy hitters like Batman, Superman. How often do those restart?
Well, I mean, those are over at DC, so they do things differently
Yes,
there.
fair. Okay. Then
Like
how about Iron Man?
Spider-Man, for
Spider-Man.
example. I think I can only recall once or twice that his comic has restarted, but he has like several comics going. So
Yeah, he has a bunch of offshoots, and I think that would be like an interesting way of doing that. Instead of restarting, you could be like, it's issue number 1 of this storyline. Like,
yeah. So anyway, I don't want to pass judgment on poor Carol. Like, let's assume the best and assume that her multiple restarts are because Marvel Comics just want to like get new people reading the books. And I should just mention that Carol Danvers was created by Roy Thomas and Gene Colan. So if you go see this movie and you're super excited about the character, you have to thank Roy Thomas and Gene Colan for creating the character originally. Even though it seems though the movie is drawing inspiration from the most recent run of comics and where she's Captain Marvel, and those were started by a writer named Kelly Sue DeConnick. So I guess you gotta thank her as well. This is a character not unlike Black Panther, wherein the people who like originally created it and then the people who defined the modern version are different. So I don't know who to claim. I mean, I guess the people who originally created it, but at the same time, anyway. Am I getting into semantics? One shot?
quite possibly, but at the same time, it brings up interesting dialogue because Black Panther, I had no idea. I guess all characters go through new iterations, but I love the new Black Panther. Not to say I enjoyed this movie too, but for very different reasons.
So there you go. Carol Danvers has been in the comics since 1968. She's been a superhero in her own right since 1977. And she's done the best she has tried, I guess, to become her own person, separate from the male character that she was a spinoff from. And it's only been since 2012 that she has been the definitive Captain Marvel. So there you go.
The perhaps complicated history of Captain Marvel.
Yeah, if anyone wants to play a drinking game for this episode.
Every time we mention Marvel, take a drink.
Yeah, that'd be way too many. Maybe even Captain
Take a
Marvel.
sip?
Yeah, or I don't know. Do whatever you want. Let's go over to the movies itself now. So how long do you think they've been working on this Captain Marvel movie for?
This movie or like the idea of a Captain
Yeah,
Marvel?
so sorry, let me clarify. So when do you think they first started working on developing a Captain Marvel movie?
Oh my goodness. Given the amount of restarts, I want to say 7 years.
7 years? Okay, so
2012.
2012. Okay, so you're not far off. According to the source I'm looking at, they started working on a script for Captain Marvel in 2013.
Ooh.
However, in October 2014, Kevin Feige, the president of Marvel Studios and the guy who's listed as the producer on all these movies, he announced in October 2014 that indeed Captain Marvel would be part of the Phase 3 slate of films.
Okay.
And
So she's officially announced.
She was officially announced in October 2014, and her release date was supposed to be on July 6th, 2018.
July 6th. The 2018?
Yeah.
Okay.
So in other words, he was projecting a movie was going to happen in 4 years.
Yeah.
So at that
And then
point...
another half a year later? Another, oh goodness, 10 months?
Okay, so there's a whole story here. So at that point in October 2014, they'd announced that Gal Gadot was going to be in Batman vs. Superman as Wonder Woman. So the thinking is that they fast-tracked the announcement of the Captain Marvel movie to kind of stay on pace.
Okay.
Get
a strong female lead.
Because typically most things, well, both Marvel and DC were criticized for making movies that were not making movies with female leads.
Okay, yep, I could see
And when
that.
Guardians of the Galaxy came out, they're like, you made a movie about a tree and a raccoon before you made a movie about a female character.
Yeah.
So I think Kevin announced the Captain Marvel movie.
Well, I mean, for their sake, I am Groot.
Okay, I am Groot. But anyway, any of the fans of Captain Marvel who were paying attention to these press conferences would have seen that and gotten really excited. But things just don't work out the way you want to sometimes, because basically what ended up happening is that in February 2015, when the announcement was made that Spider-Man was going to be coming to the MCU through the arrangement with Sony and Marvel.
The Sony deal.
The Sony deal. And with the announcement that they were also making a new Spider-Man movie, essentially a lot of the release dates that were set in stone got shuffled,
Okay.
including Captain Marvel, and Black Panther. So people kind of got upset, saying, "What the heck? Like, we've already seen 5 Spider-Man movies,
Yeah.
and now these original ideas are getting bumped for the sake of another Spider-Man movie." So Captain Marvel had its release date changed from July 2018 to November 2018.
Okay. So 4 months after that.
Yeah, and then even further down the line. Okay, so I just want to make sure I understand all this stuff so that you understand it, so that our listeners understand it. So, movie was announced October 2014 for July 2018.
Okay.
Then in February 2015, they pushed it from coming out in July to coming out in November. And then again in October 2015, they changed the date to moving it from November 2018 to March 2019.
Okay. Where
And-
we are now.
Yeah, and I can't remember this exactly, but I'm pretty sure that October 2015 is when they announced that Avengers 3 was going to be in 2 parts.
Okay.
So I think Captain Marvel was pushed again because of the announcement of the second or the third or fourth Avengers movie.
Okay, so basically they announced it's coming out in 2 parts, and then they said, okay, we're pushing back Captain Marvel.
Yeah, and again, I can't remember if other movies got their release dates changed as well. Needless to say, this movie's been on the docket for 5 years now. It's had its release date pushed around twice because of other Marvel movies. Although the character did not appear in Avengers Infinity War, she was certainly hyped through the post-credit scene. So, did that post-credit scene in Infinity War, when Nick Fury pulls out that pager, did that get you interested in Captain Marvel?
It certainly got me like thinking about it. That's for sure. Because it's like, oh, who's he paging? Like, who's this person that he's been paging, and how are they going to be able to help? So, I think now having this movie right before it kind of gives us a taste for what powers she has, and how she might be able to help, and like kind of how she knows Nick Fury. So I think that was kind of cool.
I knew enough about Captain Marvel that when the little Captain Marvel logo came up on the pager, I knew what it was alluding to.
Yeah, I remember asking you when we watched it, I'm like, what is that? Like, I have no idea. But
Yeah.
and then you told me.
It shows how much I've grown in my Marveldom, because when Thanos...
I marvel at your
Thank
abilities.
you. Well, when Thanos showed up at the first Avengers in credit scene, I didn't know who that was. I had to look him up. But with this, I knew what it was, and I didn't have to look it up. So
Nice.
I'm getting smarter, and by some definition of the word smarter. So anyway, this movie's been on the docket for 5 years now. It really picked up pace in 2016, 2017 when they announced Brie Larson was going to be the lead character. She got announced at Comic-Con, which is always a great place to announce new characters, or new actors, I should say. And here we are. The release date didn't change again. It actually did come out in March 2019. As I mentioned earlier, this film was definitely announced in response to Wonder Woman.
Okay. Yeah, I could see that.
Because, I mean, generally, the commentary between Marvel and DC movies is that DC is playing catch-up. Like, Marvel got the team-up movie first. It got to building the cinematic universe first.
Yeah, it had a lot of years where DC was kind of a no-show.
So it's interesting that the one area in which they have an edge is with female-led movies. And Wonder Woman is, I mean, the iconic female superhero. She was the first. She has that status in the same way that Superman is the first male superhero.
I would say that, like, I would agree with you 100%. But also I would say that DC hasn't really been doing a good job of that. So Marvel, I would say, has, I think understandably, has been kind of the iconic lead for pretty much every minority and every group but women.
So it's important for us as we're talking about this movie to just try and, the best we can, talk about it as a movie itself and not at a response to Wonder Woman.
Yes.
Which I learned today, you have not seen Wonder Woman.
I have not.
So this is...
And it wasn't like for like a lack of like hearing hype about it, or like it's just a movie that's always been on my radar that I've just never gotten to.
Well, it'll benefit our conversation because you now have the perspective of somebody who has not seen Wonder Woman but has seen Captain Marvel, and I've seen both. So I'm going to try my best to leave my like comparison hat at the door. Maybe that'll be a future episode, is comparing their approaches to making a female-led movie, but nonetheless, it's not going to play in a conversation today. I gave you my Wonder Woman Blu-ray as homework. You got to take that home and watch it.
Will do. Ask me about it next time I come on the show.
I will. So needless to say, this movie has certainly, from the minute it was announced, gotten a lot of media attention because it is Marvel's first female-led movie, and because Marvel has done a better job at making superhero movies in general. It's like, oh, this will be their response to Wonder Woman. This will be the superhero movie with a woman in the lead. And Marvel, even in their advertising for the movie, was not shy about it. The moment that kind of made me like groan a bit in the trailer for the film, there's one point where it says like the story begins, and then the words "with a hero" comes up on the screen, but then all of a sudden
slowly fade in.
Yeah, well, it just it fades in, and
with
then
a hero,
and then both the and the O, like the A in like the word and the O in hero disappear, and then it just says "with her."
Oh my goodness!
And I was like, okay, we get it.
Okay.
Now, I want to be fully transparent. Like, obviously, we're both males talking about this movie that has a female lead. So people might argue that because male superheroes are overrepresented in this genre of film, and we might not be the best people to talk about this, but you know what? Like, we're just giving our own opinions and our experiences watching the movie.
We're doing our best here, guys.
So I don't want to, again, I felt like the marketing for the film was a little on the nose, like reminding you, oh, like, this is what this movie is about.
Well, and see, I kind of don't like it when they like focus on any particular person, and they're like we need to market it that it's a woman superhero, like why it's a superhero movie.
Yeah, like, I mean, if you want to compare it to Black Panther, in the marketing for that, it's not like they said he's black.
Yeah. Black capital. I guess Black Panther is kind of.
But you know what I mean? Like, none of the marketing.
Yes, they never said, "Look at our black superhero."
Exactly. That's the critique I have of the marketing for the film. And this is where things get a little interesting, because now we get to talking about what critics and audiences are saying about the film. Because this film is actually, I don't know, kind of quasi-controversial, because it's causing a lot of ruckus online.
Is that just in relation to like plot points that people have noticed, or is that in relation to like political messages, or like
a little bit of both?
A little bit of both.
Like one thing that happened as a result of Captain Marvel, there used to be a feature on Rotten Tomatoes where before a movie was released, you could indicate if you wanted to see it or not.
Okay.
And so it had a movie that was like announced and had a release date,
like a hype button or something.
Yeah, and that was registered as a percentage. So even before the movie was released for the public, you could see like what percentage of people were interested in seeing the movie. Well, the Captain Marvel want to see percentage was doctored to be as low as like 30%.
It was doctored?
And I say doctored because basically what happened is a bunch of people with extra accounts logged in and intentionally like gave it bad.
Oh, don't want to see it.
Because they wanted the movie to fail.
Some bad hype.
Yeah, and so that was enough for basically Rotten Tomatoes to decide to remove that feature from their website.
Ooh.
So, sorry folks, if you want to put a I want to see this movie thing on Rotten Tomatoes, you can't anymore, because the people who don't want to see a Captain Marvel movie...
you ruined it for the rest of us.
Yeah, and it's hard to say like what's really at the root of... I mean, people will say...
Do we know if that was fans, or was that people like... What was the cause of the bad hype?
Well, there's... Again, I don't know what the answer is. I hear different things. I hear... oh, Brie Larson is really political in real life, and so there's people who don't enjoy her politics that are just going to try and be mean towards anything she does. There's people I see on Twitter that seem to think that there's a group of male fans who just do not want movies with female characters to succeed, so they're going to do everything in their power to essentially make the movie fail. So if that means logging into a ratings website a bazillion times to give it a low rating, then that's what they're willing to do.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I just hear different things.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I look at this information on Rotten Tomatoes, and I'm not convinced it's truly accurate information. Currently, the tomato meter, which again is the aggregate of critic reviews, is sitting at 80%.
Okay. Is that certified fresh?
Yes.
At 80%?
I think anything above 75 is certified fresh.
Okay.
But I guess that means the critics, and again, I've seen people on Twitter go as far as say, oh, like male critics are going to give this movie a lower rating because it has a female lead, and I think that's a bit of a stretch, but that's an opinion nonetheless. Where I really think the numbers are inaccurate is with the audience score, because Rotten Tomatoes' audience score is sitting at 57%.
Ooh, ouch.
And I do not think the movie is bad enough to earn a rating like that.
A 57.
And that's why I think it's artificially doctored.
Okay. Yeah, no, I could get on board with that.
And that kind of scares me, because if it is a case wherein people are actually like logging into the website many times to doctor the score,
they could do that with anything.
Yeah, but it's just like isn't that kind of sad that you are so uptight about a movie that you want to like basically ruin its reputation, if you will?
It is, but we're not here to pass judgment on them.
Right. So I usually kind of take the audience score as it is and accept it and say, like, this is where this movie is at in terms of how the audience feels.
Oh, but I guess we don't have an accurate judgment of that.
Well, we have the cinema score.
Ooh.
Have you heard of cinema score before?
I have not. What is the cinema score, Joe?
Well, faithful listeners of the podcast will remember that a cinema score is something that is done with movies in their opening weekend. Essentially, this company goes to random movie theaters and does exit polling of random audiences, and they ask them to give the movie a grade.
Okay, feedback.
It's like an A+ to F kind of thing.
Okay.
And essentially, a cinema score is a more, I guess, real number, because there's no way that people can artificially inflate the numbers.
Yeah, you're asking real people, and
you
each
only ask
person
them
has
once.
one vote.
Yeah. So, turns out, Captain Marvel earned an A cinema score.
Okay. No, that's the immediate like response to it, right?
Correct. So that's like if you wanted to like pick holes in the cinema score system, is that you're asking for a person's opinion immediately upon exiting the theater.
Yeah. So without time to think and like kind of process what you've watched, and it's kind of how I felt too. It's like, but we'll get into that in a bit.
Okay. So there you go. It's sitting at 55%, 57% with the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. I think that's artificially low. I genuinely, I know it sounds kind of almost conspiracy theory, but I do feel like there are people who are kind of trolling and going in there to change that. And I do think the A cinema score is closer to like the actual quality of the film for people to enjoy. But,
yeah,
you know,
I can get on board with that. It was a quality film, by all means.
And we'll get into more of that. So we're talking about the box office now. It's been a pretty rough year for 2019. I think the numbers overall are 30% lower than this time last year.
Okay. Is that just like less movies to go out and see? Like less
It seems that just
movies?
I mean, for one thing, we had Black Panther by this time last year, which was a massive success. But also just the movies that are coming out are just bringing in less dollars. So
okay.
So with that in mind, how much do you think Captain Marvel made?
I'm going to say $8 million.
$8 million?
Is that low? I'm not sure. I'm bad with guesses on these.
Well, let me put it this way: when Alita: Battle Angel came out, it made like $29 million opening weekend.
Oh, okay. Let's bump that up to $20 million then.
Okay, well, Glass made $40 million.
Oh. Superhero movies make a lot, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just tell me, Joe.
Okay, so it's average Joe, by the way.
Average Joe. Sorry, I don't. But you're above average to me, Joe.
Well, then you call me Baj.
Baj. Baj. Hey, Baj. Okay.
What's up? It's an estimate at this point because numbers don't come in until Monday afternoon, but it's looking like Captain Marvel made $153 million this opening weekend.
A lot of money.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely...
How does that rate on superhero movies?
Well, it's the third largest March opening of all time.
What large super movies have come out in March?
Let me see here. So, well...
Can you see that? That's an unfair question.
So in comparison with movies that have opened up in March, the only films that have made more money in their opening weekend than Captain Marvel are Beauty and the Beast.
Is that the most recent remake?
Which made $174 million.
Okay.
And Batman vs. Superman, which made $166 million.
Okay.
So it's done quite well box office-wise. It's exactly what the MCU is needing at this point, because a lot of their openings can be around this level. Like, this is more than Thor or Guardians or Spider-Man brought in.
Like, really?
Yeah.
Like Spider-Man Homecoming?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yes, sir. So
apparently, well enough, like the A grade probably makes it like a lot more on par than the tomato scores.
yeah, well, I mean, the tomato score and in the cinema score basically just say like of the people who have seen it. If anything, I mean, again, I don't know what's real. If anything, the low tomato score would prove that the large number of people who went and saw the movie have all gone and responded. Or again, it's the trolling thing. I don't know what's real.
Well, I would say, like, I feel like the monetary numbers are probably also a good sign, unless they're being overinflated as well.
Which doesn't happen very often.
Well, there you go. Then I feel like that's a good indicator for how well it's actually received.
I think the only part of its box office that is kind of disappointing is that it didn't seem to do as well with female audiences. So when Wonder Woman came out 2 years ago, again, I know we said we weren't going to compare this movie to Wonder Woman, but this is the one area in which it really matters. When Wonder Woman came out, the audience was 52% female.
Okay. Nice.
Which means that more women were in the movie theaters than men to see Wonder Woman. Whereas with Captain Marvel, the audience was 45% female.
Okay. So a lower demographic of females.
Yeah, and to give an idea, that's basically, according to this article on Box Office Mojo, it's the smallest gender divide among MCU movies, which means that it's the closest it's gotten to, equal or more.
Okay.
It's around the same thing that Black Panther and Ant-Man and the Wasp got. So those are both movies that had a lot of female characters in leading roles.
No like additional females showed up to watch the movie.
Correct.
Okay.
So the fact
the
that
same demographic.
Yes. And I mean, generally superhero movies skew more male than female, but this is one of the examples of where Marvel has like the closest. But
it's almost like they were targeting women, but did not see an increase in women showing up.
Exactly. Whereas when Wonder Woman came out, that succeeded. More women were in the theaters than men, and the argument is that if you make a movie with a female lead, women will go and see it. That's what happened with Black Panther. They made a movie with an African-American lead, and that movie made more money than any movie in 2017. And the demographics for African-American audiences were higher for that film than any other Marvel movie, any other real movie of that kind of genre. So, and something we'll have to talk about. I mean, again, we're both guys, so maybe we don't have an answer to this, but it's, again, interesting for me to see that despite finally getting this movie where it's a Marvel movie and the hero of the story is female, they still couldn't break that gender divide. They couldn't
change that ratio of women to men.
Exactly. So, kudos. I mean, it's making its money. It's doing quite well. In one weekend, it's made more money than any movie released in 2019 domestically.
So far, just to put it in perspective. Yeah. Okay.
So, Captain Marvel's done quite well financially, and we'll get into more about the actual movie. It's taken us a while to get here. She has a very complicated comic book history. The movie has a very complicated history.
Mixed reviews. Yeah, the reviewing of the movie is complicated.
So all that to say, we're finally here talking about the actual movie. We're going to switch to story mode now.
Yeah, let's talk about this movie. So, is this our experience with it?
Yeah, so spoiler free, what do you think the story was?
Spoiler free. Ooh, good question.
The future of our world is at stake.
You have a mission.
How do I look? Fresh.
On March 8th. Is this normal?
Pretty much.
Go higher. Go further. Go faster.
About to show these boys how we do it.
Captain Marvel. You know you're glowing, right?
A woman from another planet basically finds herself on Earth trying to find and protect someone. And while she's there, she finds out some very disturbing secrets for her and kind of comes to a who am I kind of moment and trying to find herself amongst this and fights some nasties along the way.
Okay, there you go. So this film is set in the 1990s, It is really only the second Marvel movie to be a period piece after the first Avenger. Some of these other Marvel movies have included like flashbacks, like the first Ant-Man and Guardians of the Galaxy and whatnot. And there are lots of Marvel movies that aren't set in the year they were released, but this is truly one that's like set in the past.
Yeah.
And when that element of the film was announced back in 2016, I was interested because I love world building. I love the idea that this MCU exists as a place where we can get world building and we can learn more about the history, because it is
learn more about like characters' pasts and where they're coming from.
Yes, and they did, when they started announcing more of the cast for the movie, they announced that Samuel L. Jackson was going to be a main character in the movie as a younger Nick Fury, and that there were going to be other actors from other Marvel movies kind of showing up in their parts, including Clark Gregg as Agent Coulson, who we haven't seen in a movie since Avengers in 2012.
Rip.
Rip?
Well, his character.
Oh, Rip. Right. R.I.P. Yeah, because according to the movies, he's passed away, but if you watch Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., that's not the case.
Yes.
So
I'm a moviegoer. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I'm sorry, Bash.
Thank you. So, were you excited about the fact that this movie took place in the past?
Yeah. Well, I don't think it was like a more excited than seeing it in the present. I thought it was like, I enjoyed Captain America: The First Avenger, and so I was like, yeah, I could definitely see a movie set in the past as very interesting and see where that took it. So yeah, I was excited for it.
It was kind of fun because I was actually alive in the 90s. So
were you?
Yeah, I was. Can you believe it? So it was
same.
Yeah, weird. But anyway, it felt like I finally feel like we've reached a point where, they can tell stories in the past about time periods that we were alive in.
So we can really feel for.
Yeah, we can recognize the clothing and the nostalgia and the slang and whatnot. Like, they make a lot of jokes in the movie about slow internet and...
Yeah, that was great.
And file loading. It was those are some of the funniest parts of the movie for me, were just those kind of jokes. Although the
90s problems.
Yeah, and aside from the technology jokes, they really didn't do too much with the 90s setting. Like, they didn't really comment on 90s culture or 90s fashion. So if you were like a huge 90s person and you wanted like a bunch of 90s references, there's some in here, but it's not the point of the movie.
Yeah, I'd say that's valid.
In fact, a lot of the movie is set in space.
Yes, it is.
Because as you alluded to in your spoiler-free story, Carol starts out the movie living on another planet, and you essentially find out that she's living with amnesia. So again, if you remember our episode last week talking about Alita Battle Angel, where the main character has amnesia for a good chunk of the movie, it's the same thing here. She doesn't remember anything from her life before she started.
Who she was before the movie.
And it's interesting because, like a lot of stories where a character has amnesia, she essentially tries to find out about her past, and everyone around her is telling her, no, you don't need to worry about that. Forget about your old life. Just like they're just trying to like make her, like, I don't know what
push it off.
Yeah, just kind of brushing it off, and nonetheless, so the trailers kind of telegraph that you're going to find out her story.
Yeah.
And pretty much, if you watch the trailer, it's like there's no real mystery around it. Like, you know exactly what her story is going to be. Like, they show you flashes of her human past.
And even earlier on too, like you are given scenes. You are like given like, oh, this is a person from your past. It's like, oh, I wonder if we're gonna get to meet who that person is.
Yeah. So again, to compare it to something with Alita, there was a lot of mystery around her origins, and they kind of like piecemeal it out to you throughout the movie. Whereas with Captain Marvel, really from the get-go, even if you'd seen the trailer, you kind of know what's going to be revealed. So it wasn't very impressive in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah, they'd already released enough of it before the movie came out that if you'd done your homework and like watched trailers and stuff, you knew what was coming.
And I was really hoping that with this film being set in the 90s, that it was going to give us a lot of cool Easter eggs and whatnot for the MCU. There are some in this, but I don't know, there just weren't enough for me, and the ones they did include, I kind of almost groaned at.
Yeah, and others I felt like left me with questions that I was like, how does that work? And like scratching my head a bit.
There's a cat in this movie. I love cats.
Well, is it a cat?
Of course it's a cat. What kind of question is that? But, okay, I guess I should say this. I did enjoy Captain Marvel. I did enjoy the movie. Like, I'm pretty sure I'm coming off as a huge nitpicker here and complaining about a lot of stuff. The movie was enjoyable. It just wasn't very What's the word I'm looking for? It was predictable.
Predictable. It wasn't like or I guess it was not intuitive.
We're kind of blanking on our words today, but basically what I'm trying to say is that I enjoyed myself watching the movie, even though I wasn't really surprised by anything. Like, most of the plot developments were kind of, you could see it coming.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I would call that lazy writing or just not good writing or whatever.
When you tell, this is another trope they're going to throw in, and then it plays out exactly how those tropes do.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
I would also say, as you said for Battle Angel, they piecemeal it out, but for this, it's very much like you're maybe like, oh, here's some like tantalizing hints, but then they just like literally tell you the story of how it happened. And you're like, oh, okay.
The special effects were fairly impressive towards certain parts of the movie that I don't want to spoil. The CG doesn't look really believable. Like, you see CG characters kind of flying around, and you're like, I can tell that's not the actor.
Yeah, no, I could feel that, especially when it's like you have masks on and you have full space suits. It's like, okay, this could be anyone doing anything.
And again, I don't want to critique the special effects. They were generally very good, like especially when they were in space.
Yes, I also gotta say these are critiques. Like I am one of those people that would have come out and said, yeah, that was an A movie. Like, I would give it an A rating, and it's only like coming out of it that like talking about it is like, that's an interesting point. I agree with you.
Apparently, one of the inspirations for this movie was Terminator 2: Judgment Day.
I could see that.
Have you seen that movie?
Yep.
Okay, so again, I can see there's kind of like because there is kind of a part of the movie where they're on the run and they're trying to avoid certain people and whatnot.
She like steals someone's motorcycle and gets like a leather jacket she wears. Well, that's hers.
Yeah, but
still completes the look.
Yeah. Really, I gotta say, like, a lot of things I want to comment on are spoilery, so I know we're being vague, and so we're gonna enter the spoiler verse. But before we do that, just to say, it's a good movie. It's worth your time seeing, and especially just so that you can be part of the conversation as people comment on elements of the film.
I would also say it does help you get into preparing for Endgame, which is coming out soon. So definitely kind of watch it. And enjoy it. Go in there with kind of an open mind and discuss about it.
All right, so we're now entering the spoiler verse, where all spoilers for
warning
for the movie that we're talking about
spoilers are about to appear.
All right, so I mentioned just not too long ago that the MCU Easter eggs they threw in here made me cringe.
Yeah.
For one thing, the origin story for how Nick Fury loses his eye.
Oh my goodness. That part, I was like, I agree with you. Like, I hadn't really thought about it until people were talking about it. But so basically, the cat we were talking about turns out to be an alien space creature that eats anything and everything it wants to.
Yeah.
And it scratches him on the eye. And he loses it. That's all there is to it. It's a cat scratch that makes him lose an eye. And
the worst part is that, you know, when the first set photos came out, you saw that it was Nick Fury with hair and two eyes. You're like, oh, maybe this will explain how he loses his eye. And there's a very powerful scene in Winter Soldier where Nick Fury says, the last time I trusted somebody, I lost an eye. And so you think, oh my gosh, it's like a very pivotal part in his past where he...
It's like, does he have a spat with Marvel? Like with Captain Marvel? Is that how that works?
Well, it's suggested that there was some part in his past where he stopped trusting in people.
Yeah.
And he has he lives with that consequence.
How would you have felt about this movie had it ended with Captain Marvel and him on a bad note and she like causes his eye to be lost? That would have been a very interesting movie because then it has implications on, oh, he's over it now or he needs her help enough that he contacts her.
I would have even been happy because, this movie introduces us to the Skrulls, which in Marvel Comics are famous for being shapeshifters. So I would have been very happy if it had been a Skrull that did that to him, where basically it was a Skrull impersonating one of his colleagues or even his boss that he trusted, and that's how he loses his eye.
Yeah.
The version you just described would have worked just as well.
And
but the version we get is dumb. It's just like it's played off. It's a joke.
Do we want to do a spoiler, like talk about the movie, like from start to finish, and then go into these things?
Nah, man, we're just going into them.
Okay.
So anyway, that was annoying.
I was gonna say, moving on to the Skrulls. I know that like I thought like they were somewhat evil, like shape-shifting creatures that can take over people's lives and read their memories. Like that's some straight up evil. Like could totally see that happening.
Well, in the comic books, the Skrulls are mainly villains. Like they're portrayed at like the war between. This movie brings us back into the war between the Kree and the Skrulls. Yeah. We've seen the Kree in a bunch of the other movies, but this is where we really meet the Skrulls for the first time.
And the Kree are the main bad guys that Thanos is a part of, correct?
No. So like the Kree are like a race of aliens that include like Ronan from the first Guardians, who reappears in this movie.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway,
he was collecting the stones for Thanos.
Yes, or at least the Power Stone. I don't really remember what happens in the first Guardians of the Galaxy, mainly because I've only watched it once.
Dance off.
I remember that, but all that to say, what was I even talking about?
The Skrulls.
The Skrulls. Okay, so in the comics, both the Skrulls and the Kree are kind of morally ambiguous, and they're both kind of portrayed as essentially antagonists to the Earth-based Marvel heroes, because anytime that their kind of conflict gets brought to Earth, it's kind of an annoyance or a problem for the Avengers or whoever to deal with. But in this movie, they portray the Skrulls as basically refugees.
Yeah, not just like okay, we're in need of a home, but literally like, oh, there's only a few thousand of our people left, and all we want is a place to live. Yeah,
so I mean, again, we both complain about this movie being not being very surprising and being kind of tropey. So this is indeed almost like an Iron Man 3 kind of situation where your expectations are subverted. Because in Iron Man 3, you're expecting the Mandarin to be this giant bad guy, and then he turns out he's just this weird little actor dude. In this movie, you're expecting the Skrulls to be these big old bad guys, and all of a sudden they're just people looking for a place to live, and they're misunderstood. And I know
it like built up this like enemy to fight, and it was like,
which is super annoying for me because there's a Marvel Comics storyline called Secret Invasion, where it's basically the Skrulls infiltrate and take over the Earth, including members of the Avengers. And it would have been a great movie story. Like you talk about like building towards a
cinematic clash
that takes many years to plan out.
This could have been the start of something great like that.
Yeah, and I guess it could still happen, but they would have to basically do some character workshopping to make the Skrulls more evil again.
I can't remember. Did it say in the movie that like, oh, not all Skrulls are evil or not all Skrulls are good? Because in it, they talked about it as in the whole people are good and are looking to get together and just live by themselves.
Well, it sounds like they're suggesting the Skrulls are slowly being eliminated and there's only so many of them left.
Yeah.
And I can't help but wonder if that decision was made based on real-world political conversations going around refugees. And if that's the case, then I can see why, again, there might be certain people who are essentially not enjoying the movie because it includes those more politically charged elements. Maybe I'm wrong, and the movie actually doesn't draw from that at all.
I could see people reading into that.
So anyway, I'm not pleased about the way the Skrulls were handled, just because it subverts the expectations, but they're a really great group of villains, and now it'll be really hard in the future to portray them as villains.
One thing I want to talk about is the main, the Maltese Falcon of the show, the Tesseract.
Yeah.
How did this So the Tesseract is the main, I guess, goal or object that they're searching for in one part of the movie. It's not known as a Tesseract until they find it and they start talking about it. But the Tesseract in World starts or is with the Hydra at the beginning of the I guess franchise in World history, and then is taken by Stark's father. Correct?
Yeah, so the Tesseract pops up in this movie, and it confused people because if you follow the kind of the chronology of where the Tesseract has shown up in the movies, at the end of the first Captain America, you see that Howard Stark has recovered it, and then when it shows up again in the Thor post-credit scene, you see that essentially a S.H.I.E.L.D. has it, and that they're introducing Dr. Selvig to it, and Loki's manipulating him at that point. And then shows up in the Avengers with S.H.I.E.L.D. being then taken by Loki, and it goes on to do other stuff. So people were confused why it just suddenly showed up in this movie. And I guess the off-screen explanation you can give is that between that time and 1945, when Howard brought the Tesseract back, it got in the hands of the government, which then ended up with Annette Bening's character, who then took it to her spaceship.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's an explanation for it. And at one point, though, she mentions, "Oh, this is part of the engine that I've created," and it left me questioning, like, well, she didn't create the Tesseract; it was there before her. Was I misreading that?
Yeah, I can see how you might have misunderstood that, but certainly the Tesseract is the space stone, so it's the one that basically involves traveling because it opens up those portals. So I can see how her like light speed engine could have been retrofitted, created from working off of the Tesseract.
Okay.
But what's interesting about her engine is that in the comic books, the way in which Carol gets her powers is really kind of silly. There's like this fancy sci-fi machine that basically blows up, and Captain Marvel kind of shields her from the radiation, and basically something happens that basically causes the radiation impacting his body, then essentially sends his
powers,
his genetic code into her. So
she gets a copy of his code.
Yeah, so she basically becomes a human Kree hybrid as a result of an accident that involves Marvel.
Okay.
In this movie, the machine is an engine, and it's of Marvel's creation, like she created. But what's interesting is that in this movie, Carol kind of chooses her origin for herself. So what I mean by that is that she points the gun at the engine and fires, and then it's the engine's explosion that essentially gives her powers.
Yeah.
So she's a more active player in her origin story than she was in the comics, because in that it's more passive. She's just receiving something.
She's just there when it happened.
Yeah. Whereas this, she's actively choosing, like, I want to make sure this doesn't get used by these people. And she's essentially willing to live with the consequences. That was a change in the comics I appreciated, because that kind of gave her more agency and more...
Yeah, I'd see that as a pro to the whole story.
Well, something I wasn't a fan of is... I don't care because I'm not a Captain Marvel fan, but they kind of changed they completely changed the gender of, and even a bit of the character of Captain Marvel from the comics.
Yeah, she's a Kree infiltrator.
Yeah, which is still true of the original Captain Marvel comics. The only difference is that now she's female instead of being a guy. And this Marvel has clearly never been like a superhero. She's
a scientist.
She was just the scientist. And so the scientist was part of Captain Marvel's shtick, but then at the same time he also dressed up in his suit and was Captain Marvel to, fighting crime and all that. It kind of bothers me just because I can imagine there are fans of that character that want to see that on the big screen.
Yeah.
And then
some, I guess, reference or, homage to it.
Yeah, and I guess this is the closest they'll get, so it's just unfortunate that maybe I'm feeling bad for a tiny group of people.
Those pissed off fans on Rotten Tomato that are giving it bad.
I don't know. Maybe that is a reason. Maybe those are the hardcore Captain Marvel fans who are like, the character I love is not even in this movie. Yeah. That is called Captain Marvel. I mean, that could be part of it. That change actually didn't bother me so much because I felt like the role she had in Carol's journey kind of played the same as Marvel in the comics. I mean, it was just different.
Okay.
But
I can see that.
The change or thing that I wasn't I'm not a fan of many of these changes, but they basically they announced the origin of the name of the Avengers Initiative in this movie.
Yeah.
So after Captain Marvel's gone away into space at the end of the movie, you see Nick Fury at his desk and he's working on basically creating the Avenger Initiative, but he's calling it the Protector Initiative. And all of a sudden, he sees that her call sign from when she was in the Air Force was called Avenger.
And so goes and changes Protector to Avenger.
And I was like, really? Like, do we...
Kind of cringing.
It was kind of like... It's not as bad as the cat scratching his eye out thing, but it certainly was up there. It's like, that is pretty...
Also, in this scenario, she would be the first Avenger versus Captain America, who the movie was called Captain America: The First Avenger.
Yeah, so there's certainly that element as well, but it just kind of feels as though like Marvel Studios is really trying to like hammer in to the audience, she's important. She played a huge role in the formation of the Avengers, because I can appreciate the fact that, sure, like her encounter with Fury and S.H.I.E.L.D. kind of kickstarted the whole necessary planning to have the Avenger Initiative. I'm fine with that. But to then go as far as to like
name the whole team, the whole
thing after her
initiative,
it was almost as bad as in Solo when they like give him the name Han Solo because he's all alone.
Yeah,
it was like, oh man. And then in the moment I liked it because they played the Avengers theme over that scene, and it kind of like it captured my heart because I love that theme song so much. But then afterwards, I was like, come on.
Yeah. It could have been epic or something, but.
Yeah, I mean, I was really hoping for MCU Easter eggs, like references to the death of the Starks, or the references to
things in that timeline that you might see.
Yeah, or like maybe the death of I don't know, of Killmonger's dad in California, or Hank Pym quitting S.H.I.E.L.D., like talking about things that we know have happened in World, but instead it just it didn't really capitalize on any of that. Okay,
so missed out on huge opportunities to talk in World about events that are ongoing.
Well, I mean, huge opportunity is kind of a stretch. But there was an opportunity for sure that was missed.
Yeah, I don't think we have another opportunity coming up.
No, not that I'm aware of. Did you find it weird that all of a sudden when she kind of gets her powers unlocked at the end, she just knows how to use them with no problem at all?
I mean, yes. I think there was like a little bit of like in that one of the final fight scenes when she's kind of bumbling around and she's bumping into objects and things, like trying to like figure out like, oh, I'm using too much power on this, and like how to control it a bit more finitely. But like I 100% agree. It's like, oh no, I'm a badass and I'm choosing to be a badass, and like I just needed to like, I'm like, wow, that happened really quickly.
Yeah, so a criticism I've seen of the film is that people are calling her a Mary Sue.
Yeah, I could get on board
They're comparing
with that.
her to Rey from Star Wars, who basically she's just good at everything she tries, without much of an explanation. And so, I mean, again, a huge kind of recurring element to the film is that Carol has all this power, but it's kind of like there's an inhibitor chip that's kind of keeping her from really letting it out, and they're telling her to like not rely on her emotions and that she needs to like keep it cool. And so finally, when she goes Super Saiyan, really,
she gets super emotional.
Yeah, and she unlocks her full power, and then she just knows how to use all these abilities with no issue at all.
Yeah,
and I was like,
and to such an extent where, like, after she got those powers, basically everyone else, every other character became unimportant. It's like she could fly around, she could go into space, she could literally destroy whole battleships without any other people. Or it's like, well, okay, we don't need, like, literally you don't need the Avengers. That was my thought. I'm like, she's here, great, she's gonna defeat Thanos. Like, there's like, what is the point of any of these other characters?
Well, she can't undo the snap, but certainly if it came down to fisticuffs. Which brings us into this next thing with the pager, because admittedly, when that end credit scene came up in Infinity War, and all of a sudden there's this pager that contacts Captain Marvel, I was like, okay, I'm really interested in this, because I know the Captain Marvel movie takes place in the 90s, and that would explain why it's a pager, and maybe this will explain how he got the pager and why she hasn't been around all this time.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the film, after the Kree have kind of been pushed back, they do explain where she goes. She goes off into space to help the Skrulls to find a home for themselves and to avoid any more conflict. And she like tells Nick Fury like only for emergencies.
Yeah.
So
what is an emergency? Apparently, half the population needs to disappear.
Well, I think that I can see where Nick Fury's at the end of the movie. Like he wants to kind of like resolve the issues on, like he wants to like not rely on her. So that's the whole point of starting the Avenger Initiative, is trying to essentially find a way to replace her, like find like homegrown, if you will, replacements for her.
Yeah.
And so in theory, you could assume that like as the different conflicts were emerging, like really, I think the first time that he might have even entertained contacting her was Avengers, like the first Avengers.
Yeah. So I think pretty much most of the Avengers movies are on that scale.
Yeah, which to me, the way that it's kind of set up at the end here, I was kind of hoping that Captain Marvel would end with her like going into stasis block or something, like going in a cryogenic sleep, because the way it leaves it now, it's like, oh, Fury could have always just called her, and it kind of, for me, undercuts the impact of all the other MCU movies, knowing, oh, like, it wouldn't have mattered. All, like, you know,
could have just hit this button and she would have come.
Yeah, which I don't know. Do you know what I mean when I say that?
Well, I do, but also the idea of like, why didn't you call her when Ultron was a thing? Because he was going to drop a meteor and literally destroy everyone on Earth.
Well, that's what I mean. Like, basically, every major MCU movie now has this kind of like, well, even if these guys hadn't solved the problem, Captain Marvel could have been called.
I mean, yes, but it more brings the question, why didn't he call her?
Because basically, I'm sure he had because you saw that he had it on his person. I'm sure he like was basically just waiting. It's like, okay, like.
Well, even if he did do it, can she get there? I don't think she can get there instantaneously. By that sense, she would have been there as he was disappearing. Like, I still think there's a time to get her there, which is like, oh, robots are going to like drop a meteorite on the planet. We should call someone who can solve this.
Maybe he had just a lot of trust in the Avengers.
I mean, it got pretty grim.
Yeah, and this is, again, like, the way that they've established this in the movie kind of leaves us questioning things.
Yeah.
Because even if they'd, like, written it in that, I don't know, like, maybe she got stuck in some kind of portal, or she was... Maybe
in the Phantom Zone.
Yeah, or, well, that's a DC, but
I know,
still.
that was the joke.
Okay. Or maybe he thought she was dead. Like, really, that moment where he actually pulls out the pager and uses it would have had more weight if the reason by which, you know...
She didn't come before. Yeah. It also brings up the question for me is, like, so in the movie, I'm like, why wouldn't she come back when half the population disappears? Or is it like, no, she's just gone on other planets solving their problems with 50% of the population? Like, and she comes back and says, where's Fury? It's like, well, take a good guess, because I'm pretty sure 50% of the people you've seen have disappeared.
Well, I mean, let's give her the benefit of the doubt. Like, regardless of where she was at the time of the snap, she might have, observed that a lot of people were passing away, but she probably doesn't know it's exactly 50%. And so all of a sudden she finally gets the page. She probably assumes that he's been alive to send the page, right?
Yeah. Or like knows what caused it.
Yeah, that would probably be part of it as well. So this movie has post-credit scenes, as is typical for Marvel.
Yeah.
They're both...
I totally called the second one.
Yeah,
the cat scene.
Yeah, you and Tiny Tim, who was seeing the movie with us, called it as soon as the movie ended. Like, that's what's gonna be one of the scenes.
And I'm like, cat barfing up the Tesseract.
Yeah, because that's a joke. At one point, the cat eats the Tesseract. So
I'm like, oh, and I'm like, it's gonna do it like a hairball, and then it was like, all right.
Yeah, good job. I was proud of you guys for figuring that out.
Thank you.
But then the other one is it's in the spirit of Ant-Man. It kind of shows us a scene out of context from an upcoming movie.
Yep.
With the scene from, actually a lot of them are like that, but anyway, the point is you see the scene from Endgame and this is like, no, now I want to watch Endgame now.
Yeah, and basically Captain Marvel confronts the Avengers who are left.
Yeah. Did you notice her costume was a little different?
I didn't really pick up on her costume. I noticed like her head, like her hair was longer, I think, and
It makes sense. It's been...
Yeah, and I was trying to tell if her face was older, because I'm like, well, it's the same actress, so are they going to make her seem older? But like, that's
maybe that
20,
explosion kept
30
her young.
Years, that's the thing. Is like, are they going to deal now with a character that doesn't age, like, or that aged super slowly? Because that means like she's around for a long time, quote unquote.
Oh,
or
yeah.
Like, or they kill her off. Like, how do you deal with a character that just keeps on living when the actress says, I'm done here? Like, how do you...
Well, what's that thing they do in Doctor Who?
They bring in a new one, but that doesn't work unless she... Part of her thing is she can change who she is. Like,
yeah,
the movie for later.
But all that to say, so like the this post-credit scene really got me excited for Endgame, because it shows you a little bit more than what we see in the trailer for Endgame in terms of like their true sorrow that they are experiencing and
they're disheartened.
Yeah, and it just makes you like, oh, like I'm ready. Like, show me the movie now. Just do it, please.
Yeah.
Which, again, I guess that's a criticism against Captain Marvel. The fact that the best it could do was get me excited about Avengers Endgame.
And I mean, I guess part of that was, when you're like, this is going to be a strong female-led superhero movie, and the best emotion you get is, I can't wait for the ensemble film, like, instead. Like, that kind of makes you scratch your head a bit.
So there you go.
We've started a long way.
Yeah.
Badge.
Yeah, badge. So coming around to final thoughts, Captain Marvel it's a fun movie. Like, I enjoyed it. The music is very kind of old school John Williams-y.
Yeah, they had old pieces, some, and not just like John Williams, but they also had some like excellent 90s hits and like callbacks to that era. Some of them were a bit off, but
I think the greater sin in the movie is that it's predictable.
Yeah, I get to hear that.
You saw things coming, and it doesn't. Again, I said I wasn't going to compare this to Wonder Woman. I'm sorry, but just it doesn't do as good of a job telling the story of a female hero, because it kind of really, it's a little more on the nose, I guess you would say, with pointing out the fact that she's a female character.
In your face about it.
Yeah, so that doesn't mean it's a bad movie. It just means it's less subtle in its storytelling.
Yes.
And there were certain elements that I discussed in spoilers that I really disliked about the movie, so that kind of does something to my overall opinion. So I'm going to give this one 3 out of 4 bat cookies.
So initial thoughts, I would say 3.5 bat cookies. Kind of thinking about it more as I go about it, 2.75 bat cookies.
Wow. Okay, so your opinion changed a lot.
Yeah, well, because again, it is a fun movie, and like I will say that, and like without thinking about it, without like asking many questions about it, yeah, like it's a fun superhero movie. But then when like you take time to like think about it and think about some of the larger questions about it, it does make you kind of like question some of the choices they made and how we came to some of these points. And like you said, like you're like thinking about it, like, oh yeah, I was expecting a lot of those tropes and how they ended up turning out and how the movie would flow. Like, yeah, I did expect that.
So there you go. So it is a good movie. Captain Marvel is now in theaters. I gave it 3 out of 4. The end result was 2.78, was it, for one shot?
2.75.
2.75.
So
okay.
Overall rating of 2.8.
Are you like averaging the two?
Yes, I was trying to.
Okay.
2.875.
So let's just round it to 2.9.
Okay. 2.9.
Okay. So there you go. So it's out in theaters. We both enjoyed it. I mean, there's problems with it like most movies. So yeah, I think you'll enjoy it. Especially if you're a fan of the MCU, because it does set up Avengers Endgame. You know, we have an email from Andrew Taylor, but this is going to be a long episode. So actually, I think we're going to save that one for next week. But, you know, if you want to contact the show like Andrew, you know, One Shot, why don't you remind them how they can do it?
Well, if you want to contact the show with a question or an idea for an episode, you can send us an email to
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
Or you can tweet us at
The Bat Cookie Jar.
We are available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, SoundCloud, and wherever you get your podcasts.
Like YouTube.
Share our posts on Facebook and make sure to like our page, because we want everyone to join us inside the Bat Jar.
Even if you're a Skrull.
Especially if you're a Skrull.
So, One Shot, this is actually exciting because for the first time since I think late November, we're actually going to be pulling a topic out of the Bat Jar for next week. So,
woo! I feel honored.
People who have started listening to the show recently may not know this because it's been so long, but generally the whole reason there's a Bat Jar in the show is that topics are inside the Bat Jar, and that's one of the benefits of emailing us, is that you can control what we talk about, because whatever gets emailed to us as a suggestion goes inside the Bat Jar, and in theory, on a weekly basis, topics are pulled out of it. It's just the last couple months has been lots happening, so here we go. One Shot, it's up to you. I'm taking the lid off. Oh, there you go. You can hear him. Oh, he got something. What do we have?
Ooh, Outlander.
Okay, so, yep. I guess next week we're going to be talking about the TV show Outlander. So I don't know much about this. I know it was...
You got your homework too, it seems.
Yeah, so there you go. So let's put the lid back on there. I want to thank One Shot for joining me on the show this week in Pixel Patch's absence.
Happy to help out and happy to be here. I always enjoy spending time with you, Bash.
Thank you, Bash. I like it. So come back to the Batch Art Podcast next week when we talk about Outlander. And until that time, I'm Average Joe.
And I'm One Shot.
Catch you on the flip side.
And keep on nerding it up.